What if parallel universes are real? Not a theory sitting in a textbook somewhere. Real, happening right now, and possibly right next to you. In 1954, a man walked into a hotel in Tokyo, carrying a passport from a country that has never existed on any map ever drawn. He spoke 4 languages. He had money, business cards, stamps from a dozen countries in his passport. Every detail checked out, except one. And that one detail is the reason people are still talking about him 70 years later. Less than a day after he checked in, he was gone. Not gone, as in he left. Gone, as in vanished. Out of a locked room, 3 floors up, with guards standing outside the only door. Nobody has ever explained it, and nobody has ever found him. And by the time this video ends, you might not be so sure which version of reality you're sitting in right now. Stay until the end, because what happened in that hotel room has never been closed. He looked completely normal. That's exactly what makes this so hard to explain. It started as the most ordinary afternoon imaginable. A man walked into a mid-size hotel in Tokyo and asked for a room. He said he was a European businessman in town for meetings, and honestly, nothing about him raised a single flag. Although, his documents were in a language the staff didn't recognize, which they simply assumed was some foreign dialect. He mentioned he'd visited Japan before, more than once, always for work. The front desk had zero reason to question him. He filled out his paperwork, handed over his passport for the standard check, and disappeared upstairs for the night. Just like every other guest that day. Except he wasn't like every other guest. Because when the hotel staff ran his passport against the list of recognized countries, one thing didn't line up. His home country, a small nation he called Taured, sitting somewhere between France and Spain, wasn't on that list. Not a spelling error. Not a clerical slip. It simply wasn't there. Where he claimed his country had always stood, there has only ever been one nation, Andorra, sitting in that exact spot for over 700 years. And when they told him this, calmly, expecting him to laugh it off, he didn't. He just looked at them like they were the ones who had it wrong. So they did the only thing that made sense. They handed him a map. And what happened next is the moment this story stops sounding explainable. He didn't hesitate for a second. His finger landed exactly on Andorra. Right here, he said. Between France and Spain. This is Taured. This is where I was born. This is where I have lived my entire life. He wasn't lost or fumbling. He could name the surrounding countries perfectly. He described mountain roads he claimed to have driven 100 times. He simply insisted, with total calm, that his country had occupied that spot for as long as he could remember. A real nation with its own government, its own history, sitting in a place where every map on Earth shows only Andorra. Authorities were called in, and by every account of that night that survived, the man stayed composed through the entire thing, almost annoyed, like the confusion belonged to everyone else in the room, not to him. They took him upstairs to a hotel room for the night, while officials tried to figure out what to do with a man whose entire life pointed to a country that, as far as anyone could prove, had never once existed. Before we go any further, stop for a second. Because what if this wasn't about him at all? What if it was about you? Picture waking up on a completely normal morning. Your alarm goes off at the same time it always does. Your room looks exactly the way you left it. You get up, get dressed, walk outside, And for the first few minutes, absolutely nothing feels wrong. You take your usual route, past the same buildings, the same corner store you've walked by 1,000 times. Then, somewhere around the 4th block, something shifts, just barely, in a way you can't quite put your finger on. A building looks like it's the wrong shade of color. A street sign has a name on it that you'd swear a second ago used to say something else entirely. You brush it off. You tell yourself you're tired. You check your phone, and there's a message about something you've genuinely never heard of before. Not a typo. Not a glitch in the app. A full story with quotes describing an event that, as far as your memory is concerned, simply never took place. You walk into your usual coffee shop, and the barista greets you by a name that isn't yours. Not rudely, either warmly, like she's called you that for years. Like in her version of this morning, that has always been your name. Nothing about it screams danger. That's the part that makes it worse. It's quiet, small, the unmistakable sense that you're standing inside a world that's almost your world, except for a handful of details someone has quietly swapped out, one piece at a time. Like the whole thing got shifted a few inches to the left while you weren't looking. And if certain corners of modern physics are onto something, that feeling might not be your imagination at all. It might be the closest thing to an explanation the man in that Tokyo hotel room ever tried to give anyone. That exact feeling has a name, and some of the sharpest minds in physics think it points to something far bigger than one confused man in a hotel room. For decades, some physicists have entertained an idea that sounds almost too wild to say out loud in public, that our universe might not be the only one. Not as a metaphor, as a literal, physical possibility. The theory goes that every single outcome of every single event splits reality in two, spinning off an entirely separate world that keeps running parallel to ours, forever. Under this idea, every decision, every coin flip, every fork in history could send reality down two paths at once. One where a war ends differently. One where a border gets drawn a few kilometers to the left. One where a tiny country between France and Spain never gets swallowed up the way Andorra swallowed it here, and instead survives, grows, and keeps its own name, Taured. Some call this the multiverse theory. Nobody has proven it. Nobody has disproven it either. And that gap, that uncomfortable, unresolved gap, leaves one question hanging in the air. If these other versions of Earth really are out there, stacked like pages in a book we can't fully read, what happens on the rare occasion those pages brush against each other? What slips through in that instant? That question is exactly what turns a strange passport into something much bigger than a strange passport. Because a man carrying documents from a country that has never existed here is precisely what you'd expect to find if a page from another world had just barely touched our own. Which brings us back to that hotel room, because what happened inside it that night is the part of this story nobody has ever managed to explain. That night, officials weren't ready to just let the man walk free, but they also had no clear crime to charge him with. So they placed him in a room on an upper floor, told him to stay put, and posted guards outside his door until morning, planning to sort the rest out with the proper authorities in daylight. The room, according to every account that survived, had no balcony, no fire escape, nothing but a single door, watched all night without a break, and a sealed window overlooking a straight drop with nothing to climb down to, even if someone tried. By morning, when officials came back to question him, the room was empty. His passport, his documents, every single one of his belongings, gone right along with him. Nobody saw him leave. The guards, standing right outside his door, reported nothing. Not a sound, not a shadow. The entire night. No broken window, no forced door, no struggle of any kind. He was simply not there. And in the decades since, according to everything that's been passed down about that night, no record has ever surfaced showing that man was found again, anywhere, under any name. A man who claimed to be from a country that has never existed vanished from a room where vanishing should have been impossible. And here's the part that's kept this story alive for over 70 years. He might not have been the only one this ever happened to. Over the years, people digging into this case have surfaced other accounts that echo it in unsettling ways. Travelers carrying currency from banks that don't exist anywhere on record. Documents referencing cities that appear on no map in no country anywhere. People who calmly, without a shred of confusion, insist that a well-known historical event unfolded completely differently than everyone else around them remembers it. Almost none of it can be verified. There's no surviving photo of the man from Taured, no copy of his passport, no official case file anyone has ever managed to produce. Depending on how you look at that, it's either the reason to write the whole thing off, or the exact reason this story has refused to die for over 7 decades. Because if something like this genuinely happened, even a single time, it would mean the walls separating one version of Earth from another aren't nearly as solid as we've always assumed. Which leaves exactly one question left standing. Not whether this happened once, whether it's still happening. If this theory holds even a fraction of weight, the man from Taured wouldn't have to be a one-time occurrence. He'd be proof of something that could, in theory, happen again and again. A thin seam where 2 versions of the same world briefly overlap, long enough for something or someone to slip through before it closes back up. People who followed this case for years point to something else too. The quiet number of unexplained disappearances logged every single year. Cases where someone walks out a door and simply never turns up again. No trail, no evidence, no explanation that has ever fully satisfied the people investigating it. Most of those cases almost certainly have ordinary, tragic answers. But a few researchers have started asking, quietly, whether a small handful of them might not. And there's a colder version of that question sitting right underneath it. If someone can slip out of their world into ours, that door, if it exists at all, would presumably open in both directions. Which means somewhere out there, in a version of Earth that looks almost exactly like this one, someone might be sitting in a hotel room right now, about to disappear and step for the very first time into ours. Maybe this was never really about a passport, or a locked door, or a country called Taured. Maybe it's about the idea, sitting quietly underneath the entire story, that the world you're standing in right now could be one page out of thousands, and somewhere out there, close enough to reach, but far enough to never quite touch, a slightly different version of you is living a slightly different life in a slightly different world, that once, just once, brushed up against this one. Nobody has ever proven the man from Taured existed. Nobody has ever proven he didn't. And maybe that's exactly the kind of story that was never supposed to close. So here's what I actually want to know. Has there ever been a moment in your life, a place, a memory, a tiny detail that felt like it belonged to a slightly different version of your world than the one you're standing in right now? I will see you in the comments.